Have you ever wondered how a person trained to save lives can slowly convince himself that taking lives is not only justified, but necessary? Before Ernesto Guevara became Che.
The time has come to stand together.
Before the image, before the slogans, before his face hardened into a symbol reproduced across continents, he was something far less certain, far less resolved, and far more human than history usually allows him to be. There is a comforting illusion in believing that figures like Che Guevara were always destined for their roles. That revolution lived inside him from the beginning. That violence was written into his character. But that illusion collapses the moment we look closely at who Ernesto Guevara actually was before the world started watching. He was born in Argentina, middle class, educated, chronically ill. Severe asthma followed him from childhood, shaping his discipline and his limitations. He read constantly, studied relentlessly. He chose medicine not because he was drawn to power, but because he believed suffering could be understood, measured, and treated. At that stage of his life, Ernesto did not see himself as a destroyer of systems. He saw himself as someone who could work within them. That belief would not survive the road. In the early 1950s, Ernesto left Argentina on a journey across Latin America with his friend Alberto Granado. They traveled on a motorcycle that barely functioned, moving through Chile, Peru, Colombia, and beyond. This trip is often remembered as a youthful adventure. But what Ernesto encountered had nothing to do with freedom or romance. It was exposure, sustained, unavoidable exposure to suffering that repeated itself with unsettling consistency. He saw miners coughing blood after years underground, discarded once their bodies failed. He saw indigenous families stripped of land they had occupied for generations. He saw hunger treated as normal, poverty accepted as permanent. And most disturbingly, he saw how these conditions were not accidental. They were organized, maintained, protected. At first, Ernesto responded like a doctor. He treated individuals. He wrote notes. He recorded symptoms. But gradually, his journals changed. He began to write less about patients and more about patterns. About who owned what. About who decided. About who never seemed to benefit, no matter how hard they worked or how obedient they remained. This realization did not arrive as rage. It arrived as discomfort, the kind that does not leave you alone. When the journey ended, Ernesto returned home and completed his medical degree. Outwardly, his life appeared stable, predictable, but internally, something had already shifted. He could no longer pretend that suffering was the result of bad luck or isolated failure. It was structural. And if it was structural, then treating symptoms would never be enough. A few years later, in Guatemala, that suspicion became certainty. Guatemala had elected a government that attempted reform, land redistribution, labor rights, economic independence. Ernesto watched as that government was dismantled almost effortlessly through foreign-backed intervention. What struck him was not just the collapse itself, but how quickly it happened. How fragile legality proved to be when it threatened power. This moment is often mentioned briefly in biographies. Paragraph, a footnote. But for Ernesto, it was decisive. Guatemala destroyed his remaining faith in neutrality. It taught him that moral arguments were meaningless when they collided with force. That institutions only functioned as long as they served those who controlled them. From this point forward, Ernesto's thinking hardened. Not emotionally, logically. He began to believe that systems of exploitation could not be reformed out of existence. They had to be confronted. And confrontation, he concluded, would not be peaceful. This was not the birth of a revolutionary in the romantic sense. There was no sudden awakening, no dramatic vow. There was accumulation, experience layered upon experience until retreat felt dishonest, until neutrality felt like complicity. The man the world would later call Che did not abandon medicine because he stopped caring about human suffering. He abandoned it because he became convinced that healing individuals inside a broken system only helped that system survive longer. And once that belief settled in, there was no simple way back. This is the version of Che Guevara history rarely lingers on. The man before the certainty, before the rifle, before the point of no return. And without understanding this stage of his life, everything that follows becomes dangerously easy to oversimplify. By the time Ernesto Guevara left Guatemala, he no longer believed that observation alone could change anything. What he had witnessed there did more than disappoint him. It reorganized his thinking. He did not see the coup as an exception or an anomaly. He saw it as evidence, proof that power responded only to threats it could not ignore. This conclusion did not turn him into a fanatic overnight. It made him methodical. In the years that followed, Ernesto drifted through Central America and Mexico with a growing sense of direction, even as his life appeared unstable from the outside. He read constantly: history, political economy, accounts of failed revolutions, not to romanticize them but to understand why they collapsed. His asthma worsened, his health deteriorated, but his focus sharpened. He was no longer searching for purpose. He believed he had found it. In Mexico City, Ernesto encountered a small circle of Cuban exiles preparing for something far more concrete than theory. They were not intellectuals debating reform. They were men planning action, armed struggle, insurrection, and among them was Fidel Castro. Their first conversations were unremarkable in tone but decisive in consequence. They spoke about Guatemala, about American influence, about failed reforms and broken promises. Ernesto did not present himself as a leader. He listened, he questioned, and when he spoke, it was with a clarity that surprised even those who had been organizing for years. What separated Ernesto from the others was not ideology. It was resolve. He no longer spoke about injustice as something to be documented or protested. He spoke about it as something that had to be confronted directly, even if the cost was irreversible. Violence, in his reasoning, was not a preference. It was a consequence of a world that protected itself with force. To oppose that world without matching its methods felt dishonest to him. This shift marked the quiet disappearance of Ernesto Guevara as he had once known himself. He did not abandon his past. He reinterpreted it. Medicine, in his mind, had failed not because it was wrong, but because it was insufficient. Healing individuals while leaving the system intact now felt like prolonging the disease. Training began in secrecy: weapons handling, physical endurance, tactical discipline. Ernesto struggled more than most. His asthma attacks were frequent and debilitating. But pain did not weaken his commitment. It reinforced it. Suffering, to him, was no longer something to be avoided at all costs. It was something to be endured if the outcome justified it. During this period, he earned the nickname that would replace his given name entirely: Che, a casual Argentine expression that became an identity, a separation from who he had been. From this point on, Ernesto Guevara no longer imagined a future inside existing structures. He imagined dismantling them. When the group finally prepared to leave for Cuba, Ernesto understood the risks with unsettling clarity. He knew most of them would not survive. He accepted this not as tragedy, but as probability. Sacrifice had become abstract, necessary, calculated. This was not youthful idealism. It was commitment without illusion. As the boat moved toward Cuba, carrying men who believed they could reshape history, Ernesto did not see himself as heroic. He saw himself as consistent. He had followed his conclusions to their logical end. And once that line was crossed, retreat was no longer an option he could respect. The road from here would be violent, unforgiving, and irreversible. But in Ernesto's mind, it was the only road that still made sense. The victory in Cuba did not bring the clarity Ernesto Guevara expected. It brought contradiction. The revolution had succeeded, the old regime had fallen, and for the first time he found himself not fighting power, but exercising it. This was a role he had never truly prepared for, and one that quietly unsettled him. As part of the new government, Ernesto was given authority. Real authority. He oversaw institutions, enforced discipline, and participated in decisions that carried irreversible consequences. Executions were approved. Prisons were organized. Order was imposed. To him, these were not acts of cruelty. but acts of preservation. He believed hesitation would destroy everything they had fought for, that mercy without transformation was simply weakness disguised as virtue. Yet something began to fracture beneath the surface. Ernesto worked relentlessly, often to the point of physical collapse. He demanded the same from others. He believed sacrifice was not optional, that commitment had to be total or it meant nothing. But governance forced him into compromises he despised. Meetings, bureaucracy, administration, the slow grind of maintaining a system rather than dismantling one. The revolution, he realized, was becoming something static. And stagnation, to him, was a form of failure. Outside Cuba, his image began to spread in ways he did not control. Photographs circulated. His face hardened into an icon, simplified, romanticized, stripped of nuance. The world began turning him into a symbol while he was still alive, and he found the process deeply uncomfortable. He had never fought to be admired. He had fought because he believed he had no other honest choice. This growing distance between the myth and the man only intensified his dissatisfaction. Ernesto did not see Cuba as the conclusion of his struggle. He saw it as proof that revolution was possible. And if it was possible in one place, then it was necessary everywhere injustice survived. He left behind positions of power without hesitation. Ministries, titles, even family. These attachments felt dangerous to him, like anchors that threatened to slow momentum. He returned to the road, moving first toward Africa, then back to South America, chasing the conditions he believed could ignite another uprising. But the world he re-entered was no longer the one he had helped reshape in Cuba. Governments had adapted. Intelligence agencies had learned. Surveillance was constant. Local support was fragmented. Ernesto found himself increasingly isolated, operating in environments where trust was scarce and betrayal was common. Still, he pressed forward. Not because he believed success was guaranteed, but because turning back would have meant questioning everything he had sacrificed. And that question was one he refused to ask. In Bolivia, the final illusion collapsed. The terrain was unforgiving. Supplies dwindled. Communication failed. One by one, his companions disappeared. Some captured. Some killed. Some lost to exhaustion and fear. Ernesto knew the end was approaching long before it arrived. And yet, he made no serious attempt to escape. This was not a desire for martyrdom. It was consistency taken to its final extreme. By this point, survival itself felt like betrayal of the convictions that had guided him for years. If his ideas were to mean anything, he believed, they had to be carried to their conclusion, regardless of cost. And so he stayed. On October 9, 1967, Ernesto Guevara was executed inside a small schoolhouse in La Higuera, Bolivia. There was no trial, no public statement, no final speech meant for history. The decision had already been made elsewhere, quietly, efficiently, without ceremony. The man who had spent years confronting power face to face was removed without spectacle. He was 39 years old. In his final hours, Ernesto did not attempt to reshape his legacy. There is no evidence that he pleaded for survival or tried to bargain for meaning. Those who were present later described him as calm, composed, not defiant but not broken. By this point, the outcome no longer surprised him. He had understood the risks long before Bolivia. He had accepted them long before capture. Death transformed him instantly. The man was gone, but the image remained. And in death, Che Guevara became something far larger and far simpler than he had ever been in life. A symbol, a face detached from context, reduced to slogans that ignored contradiction. Supporters emphasized his idealism and erased his brutality. Critics emphasized his violence and erased his compassion. Both versions flattened the truth, because the most unsettling aspect of Che Guevara's story is not what he did. It is how logical his path appeared to him at every step. He did not begin with hatred. He began with empathy. He did not seek violence for its own sake. He arrived at it through accumulation. Experience layered upon experience until neutrality felt immoral, until restraint felt dishonest. Once he concluded that the system itself was the source of suffering, Every action that followed felt, to him, internally consistent. This is why the man before the revolution matters so deeply. Before the rifle, there was a doctor who wanted to heal. Before the certainty, there was a student who believed knowledge could correct injustice. Before the icon, there was a human being struggling to reconcile compassion with reality. And when that reconciliation failed, he chose conviction over doubt. History continues to argue over whether Che Guevara should be remembered as a hero or a villain. But that question misses something essential. He was neither myth nor monster. He was a man who believed the world was broken beyond repair, and who acted on that belief with absolute commitment. The danger was never simply Che Guevara himself. The danger lies in how easily moral certainty can transform empathy into permission. How conviction, once freed from doubt, can justify almost anything. Understanding Che Guevara does not require admiration or condemnation. It requires honesty about how ideals harden, about how systems shape choices, and about how a desire to heal the world can, step by step, become a willingness to destroy it in order to rebuild. That is the hidden legacy of Che Guevara. Not the image left behind, but the transformation that made it possible.